Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the fascinating 75-year history of the world's most secretive organization. Relying strictly on the facts from our source material, we're going to explore exactly how the Central Intelligence Agency evolved from its gritty post-World War II origins all the way into the modern behemoth it is today, one that's fueled by artificial intelligence and massive amounts of data.
Here's a quick look at our roadmap. We're going to trace the agency's path from its early days in the Cold War through the controversial black budget operations and right up to its pivot into modern data-driven intelligence.
Let's kick things off right at the beginning, the birth of the agency. Picture this. It's 1945. World War II has just ended, Europe is literally in ruins, and the global power dynamic is shifting incredibly fast as the Soviet Union expands its grip. The U.S. desperately needed eyes on what Moscow was planning. Now, their wartime intelligence unit, the OSS, was actually shut down in 1945, but just 2 years later, President Truman realized they absolutely needed a permanent, peacetime intelligence service to counter the Soviets.
So, in 1947, they passed the National Security Act. It was a pretty hurried piece of legislation, but here's the wild part. The mandate was incredibly vague. It allowed the agency to perform, quote, other functions and duties related to intelligence as directed by the National Security Council. The crucial takeaway here is that this extremely vague wording gave the new agency immense flexibility, power, and a whole lot of secrecy right from the start.
Moving on to our next chapter, which is where things get really intense. We're talking coups and black budgets.
Because let's face it, waging a shadow war across the globe, that takes an unbelievable amount of cash. To stabilize a ruined Europe, the U.S. launched the famous Marshall Plan. But secretly, 5% of those funds were diverted straight to the CIA. That is roughly $685 million. This staggering figure served as a black budget. It was used to quietly influence elections, bribe politicians, and run massive propaganda campaigns across post-war Europe just to stop the spread of communism.
But, as you might guess, throwing money at a problem doesn't instantly buy success. Early on, the CIA was actually plagued by failures and deeply infiltrated by Soviet agents. They desperately needed a headline victory. Enter Operation Ajax. The source highlights this 1953 mission in Iran as a textbook covert operation where cash was literally used to topple a democracy. To protect Western oil interests, the CIA poured money into Iran, bribed parliamentarians, funded street mobs, and successfully ousted Prime Minister Mossadegh. At headquarters, it was hailed as a masterpiece, but it set a highly controversial precedent for American intervention moving forward.
This brings us to a massive shift in strategy for the agency, the pivot to technology.
By the mid-1950s, the CIA had to face a really harsh reality. They were being fatally penetrated by double agents. The Soviet KGB was the absolute gold standard of human espionage. They had decades of ruthless tradecraft and deep, untouchable networks. The CIA was constantly getting burned. So instead of fighting a losing battle on the KGB's turf, the agency made a strategic pivot. They decided to play to America's ultimate strength and build superior technology.
So what do? You go high, 70,000 feet high to be exact. This was the cruising altitude of the newly developed U-2 spy plane. It functioned practically like a spy satellite with a pilot, flying safely above Soviet radar and missiles. It was a total technological triumph that could photograph 2-foot objects from 13 miles up in the air. Finally, Washington had a clear, accurate look at Soviet military capabilities. But of course, leading into tech didn't mean they completely abandoned covert human operations. And frankly, not all of those were triumphs. This raw quote captures President Kennedy's extreme frustration following the disastrous Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961. A CIA-backed army of Cuban exiles failed miserably in their attempt to overthrow Fidel Castro. It was a humiliating public defeat that severely tarnished America's image on the global stage.
Which leads us directly into our fourth area. Scandals, dirty money, and crossing the line.
As the Cold War dragged on, the agency's methods got increasingly extreme. The source material impartially details Project MKUltra, revealing the shocking extent to which the agency pursued mind control right here on the domestic front. In their desperate search to create perfect, untraceable assassins, what they called Manchurian candidates, the agency crossed a massive ethical line. They experimented on unwitting domestic subjects using LSD, hypnosis, and sensory deprivation.
And this kind of extreme operational mindset spilled over into the financial scandals of the 1980s. Take a look at this sequence. It perfectly breaks down the complex flow of dirty money during the infamous Iran-Contra affair. It turns a wildly convoluted global scandal into a pretty clear formula. The CIA helped facilitate selling arms to Iran to help free American hostages. Then, those massive profits were funneled through secret Swiss bank accounts and illegally diverted to fund Contra rebels down in Nicaragua.
Then, in 1991, the unthinkable happens. The Soviet Union collapses. The red flag comes down and the Cold War is just over. But for the CIA, this sparked a massive identity crisis. Their primary rival, the one they were built to fight, simply vanished. Budget shrank, stations closed, and the agency really had to ask itself, without the KGB, what exactly is the CIA for? That brings us to a completely new and tragic era, the War on Terror.
That existential question of what are we for wouldn't remain unanswered for long. Following the devastating loss of nearly 3,000 lives on September 11, 2001, intelligence was immediately thrust back into the very center of national security. The mission was no longer about containing a rival superpower. It became an absolute mandate to dismantle terrorist networks by any means necessary.
Now, fighting a decentralized enemy hiding out in remote mountains meant traditional raids were often way too risky. So the CIA adapted again, bringing the drone into the shadows of war. Using Predators and Reapers equipped with Hellfire missiles and the ability to loiter for 24 hours at a time, they created a cleaner, cheaper method of precision striking. A pilot could sit safely in a bunker in Nevada and neutralize a target halfway across the globe without risking a single American life.
The 2000s turned into a decade of stark contrast for the agency. On one hand, you had the deeply flawed intelligence regarding Iraqi weapons of mass destruction in 2003, weapons that, as we know, were never found. On the other hand, you had the relentless and ultimately successful decade-long hunt for Osama bin Laden. In 2010, they tracked a suspect to a compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan. And finally, on May 2, 2011, a covert operation eliminated him.
And that sets the stage for where we are right now, the data-driven future.
Because eliminating bin Laden definitely didn't erase the broader decentralized threat. The agency had to evolve yet again. The source details how this led to a massive CIA investment in Palantir. This is a Silicon Valley software company designed to ingest absolute mountains of data. We're talking travel logs, bank wires, live drone feeds, and weave all of it into a single living map. This allowed analysts to actually see hidden webs of terrorist cells that no human eye could ever piece together on its own. It fundamentally shifted how the agency operates, allowing them to anticipate threats before they happen rather than just reacting to the fallout.
So what's the big takeaway from all of this? It's that the old battlefield of the Cold War was defined by physical geography, rigid borders, and human tradecraft, but the new battlefield is vastly different. Today, it's defined entirely by information, artificial intelligence, sweeping surveillance, and cyber capabilities. Modern intelligence isn't really about geography anymore. Whoever controls the information wins.
Which leaves us with a pretty profound question to ponder as we wrap up. Today, the CIA has resources its founders couldn't have even dreamed of, but they're operating in an era of maximum complexity. When we look at near-peer competitors like China and deeply fragile, globally interconnected systems, we really have to ask, can the agency adapt to this new world without making a fatal mistake? What happens in the next blind spot sets off a chain reaction that no one can stop. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next one.